Hi, I'm Trevor Noren, investment communication strategist at Wellington Management. And Dara, it is great to be with you. We are here to talk about future themes.
Hi, Trevor. Great to see you. Yeah, I'm really excited about this session and sharing a little bit more about future themes.
As you know, I'm a relatively new joiner to the firm. I'm only 4 months in. And actually, my third week was the first week of Future Themes presentations internally. And it was really an incredible introduction to the firm to see the breadth of expertise collaboratively aimed at exploring and understanding the trends that will reshape the globe over the next decade. To see how this fits into the firm's rich history. It was really illuminating, and I would love to learn more about your role in leading Future Themes and the role you see Future Themes playing at Wellington as a firm.
Yeah, for sure. I'm happy to share that. I've been with Wellington about 12 years. Before joining Wellington, I was a macro-oriented investor in different parts of the world, in Europe and in the US. And for the past 12 years since joining Wellington, I've been leading the next generation thematic platform based in Singapore. So we manage a range of single and multi-theme investment solutions. So with that kind of background, I've always been very interested in thematic in investing and thematic research. And in 2019, toward the end of 2019, Terry Burgess, the head of research, asked me if I'd be interested in leading the latest version of Future Themes. And I was really excited for two reasons. One, because you get an opportunity to canvass the opinion of a really large and smart group of colleagues, and get to ask them how they think about the future of economies, politics, society, and technology. And given the various complicated cross currents we face in all of those areas, it felt like an opportune time to do that. And then the second reason I was excited was it gave us the opportunity to play around and try and do something a little bit different with Future Themes. As we'll get in, I'm sure, to talk about, Future Themes has a very long history at Wellington. And thinking about how we could update it and keep it most relevant sounded like an exciting challenge. I was the project leader for Future Themes this time round. So my job was to try and provide some high level creative insights into how we could take the project forward. But then I was supported by a very capable project team who was helping me implement those plans and drive the project over the past 12 to 18 months.
So speaking of the challenges of leading an effort like this, it's remarkable the scale and diversity of topics covered in Future Themes, the implications of climate change over the next decade, factory and medical automation, the digitization of the monetary system. How did you're in search of both uncovering, understanding these mega trends, but at the same time uncovering insight that can be actionable and guide capital allocation. And so, how did you tackle the challenge of organizing such a diversity of perspectives and making sure it's focused in a direction that can come to the most productive conclusions?
Yeah, so that's a really, really important question. And I think it's one that probably faces anybody that takes on a project like this. One of the things we talked about at the very outset of the project was setting an objective to get a lot of ideas. And we wanted real creativity. So if you want a lot of creative ideas, you really have to keep the bar pretty low. You don't want people to write a big thesis. You don't want a huge amount of supporting information. The more supporting information there is for an idea, the less differentiated it's likely to be. So we came up with an online tool to make it easy for people to submit ideas. We only asked them for about 150 words or so to describe the idea, a simple descriptive title, and then 3 to 5 keywords per idea that they submitted. And I'll come back to why those keywords were important. And with that low bar, we just did a lot of internal marketing to get people excited about sharing their ideas. And thankfully, we had a really good take up. So every office, every function around the firm participated. Roughly 50% of the ideas came from investors. and the other 50% from all variety of different groups at the firm, from the client group to the trading side to the support staff. And more than half of the ideas came from people under the age of 40. So it felt like we had good age diversity in the ideas as well. So at the end of the whole project, we had 650 thematic ideas from all around the world, all 16 Wellington offices, everything ranging from using fungi as a building material to central bank digital currencies, as you were alluding to. So taking all of those 650 messy ideas and putting some sort of a shape around them was the next challenge. And that's where the keywords came in. So that really gave us a jump start. We were able to partner with our internal investment science colleagues, use some of their pattern recognition tools and use some of their natural language processing tools to look for links between all of the various ideas. And that helped us break down all 650 ideas into four big categories. We call those the four S's: science, society, sustainability, and systems. And that then allowed us to map every idea around that overall structure. So at the end of that work, we had a nice colorful chart with lots of ideas spread all around those four big S's.
Wow, that's fascinating. And you mentioned that lead the next generation thematic platform. You spend your day in and day out studying themes and their evolution, and then applying that to your investment strategies. This covers such expansive ground, and I'm wondering, what did you learn in the process that reshaped your thinking, or was just an insight that turned a light bulb on that you hadn't come to on your own?
Yeah, well, I guess there's a few things. Being able to tap into so many different people and understand what they're concerned and interested about or excited about felt like a wonderful opportunity to understand what's important to other people around the world in other geographies, other age cohorts, other different genders, and there was a few surprises, things that I don't think necessarily an awful lot about, but other people seem to be thinking a lot about. And I'll throw a few ideas out there for you. So the first was the idea of human augmentation. So there were a lot of ideas focused on this notion of thinking of our bodies as hardware which could be upgraded. So you think about the external hardware, you think that could lead to things like bionic suits. You think about the internal upgrading of organs, enhancements of the body, so both physical, using things like prosthetics, and cognitive. So there have been huge advances in brain science and medication that goes with that. So that idea of thinking of the body as both a hardware and software, which can be evolved over time, I found was really fascinating, and making sure that that would be equitable for all. Um, Another idea which I think is getting a lot of attention. And actually, just this week, I watched a documentary on this with my kids related to seafood and fishing. But it's about the sustainability of food in general. So we've had a lot of focus on meatless food, but also the notion of eating less sugar, less salt, less refined carbohydrates, cutting back on preservatives, eating less traditional dairy, thinking about seafood alternatives, and not really seeing this as anything cyclical, but really a structural change in the way we think about nourishing ourselves, and also its impact on the environment over the very long term. That I found really, really fascinating. And then the final one I'll touch on, and I think, even since we've run the project, this has gotten a lot more attention. I think 2021 has been a big year for this. And thinking about the relevance of the monetary system right now. So huge interest in virtual and cryptocurrencies, quantitative easing, modern monetary theory, the emergence of central banking digital currencies, the emergence of the Chinese RMB, and all of these as being seen as threats to the US dollar's reserve currency status. And the fact that the dollar has sat at the foundation of most traditional monetary policy for so long felt as though that was a really big change in how people saw the future. And I guess a lot of people just didn't have a very strong sense for what that could look like. But taking a step back, I'd say the final thing I'd allude to, which really struck me, was the overall interest in sustainability, more than 50% of all the 650 ideas that we got were somehow indirectly or directly linked to the notion of sustainability.
It's also that's really fascinating. And when we spoke about future themes last month, you mentioned something that was really illuminating to me. Future themes has been a firm staple for 40 years, and as leader of this iteration, you've studied all past iterations, and that led you to see patterns in how the concerns of Wellington investors have shifted over the decades, as well as how the world has evolved. And I would love if you'd dive a little more deeply into what you saw looking at the history of future themes relative to where we are today.
Yeah, the first thing I'd say is we as an organization and as a body of colleagues, we are substantially more globally minded than we were 40 years ago. That feels like it's stating the obvious, but I think it's important to remind ourselves how the world has changed. You go back 40 years ago, just as Future Themes was kicking off in 1981. That was around then that CNN was just getting started. So it was the start of the global news cycle on cable networks. So people were beginning to have an understanding for what was happening around the world in a way that perhaps was less accessible than for previous generations. And Wellington back then, we were, I guess, quite internally focused with logical reason. In the very first iteration of global of future themes, 55% of all of the ideas related just to the United States. And what we see now is ideas that are just US specific are a real minority that come through in the overall submission process. So that global focus, I think, is really important. And Wellington back then had no offices outside of the United States. Now we have 16 all over the world, and a real globally diverse footprint. So what's on the mind of people around the world has changed, and our understanding and the importance we assign to that has grown substantially. The second is the focus on sustainability. I've already mentioned this, but so many people at the firm feel that it's not a nice to have luxury, but it's a core way that we should live our lives. That it's a core way that should be the focus for corporates and how they run their businesses. And increasingly, that's a very big concern for people. So that sustainability is not alone just environmental, but it's also economic and increasingly social as well. And that maybe brings me on to my next one. And that social sustainability tends to be all about connectivity and how we operate and get along with one another. And the next idea, I think, is a greater concern around technology and its impact on society more broadly. Going back in the earlier iterations of future themes, it felt like technology was generally seen as a panacea, a solver of a lot of big problems. And I think there's still a feeling in that regard, particularly as it relates to the environment. But increasingly, people are concerned about the negative externalities around technology, the way large corporates are behaving, its impact on how we connect as a society, the amount of time we spend, and how we communicate with one another, and how we build social bonds, and what that means for social cohesion over the medium to longer term. And then I'd say the final thing that really struck me is, and maybe this is because of a change in the age cohorts at Wellington. I think we as a firm have gotten younger, or at least our employees have gotten, my colleagues have gotten younger over time. It's just a greater willingness to ask really big, provocative questions. So previously, things like the monetary and political systems were seen as immovables. Now there are many more questions about why the political system works the way it does, and if that's actually correct. And that's a comment on Western political systems, not those that are far away and distant to us. Exactly the same on the monetary system. People questioning the preeminence of the dollar, the monetary policy tools that we've been using historically, and whether or not they're relevant for the modern world. A big focus again on regulation, and not the drive to deregulate that we have seen in previous iterations, but actually a desire to have different parts of economies re-regulated and have greater control. And then the one overarching one that I felt came through quite clearly which wasn't something that I could notice quite so much looking back in time, was a desire for a different measure of economic progress. People being less concerned about GDP growth as a metric for progress and thinking more about human well-being, and thinking more about our effect on the environment, and trying to somehow incorporate that into industrial and political policy and how we should think about the world as we look ahead.
Fascinating to hear the progression that Future Themes has gone through over the years, and I got to imagine that concerned approach has only increased the vitality of what's discovered in the process and how that applies to actionable betterment of the world through investment. Speaking of which, we are only the warm-up act, and we have a lot of great presentations to come. I've had a sneak preview of many of them in our internal presentations, but would love to hear more about what we have to look forward to.
Yeah, Trevor, over the next few weeks, we're going to be hearing from four distinct groups. So I mentioned the four S's earlier. So within the four S's, we've had research captains and dedicated research teams digging deeper on different topics and presenting those ideas back to the firm to further our own thinking and stimulate internal research debate. And our captains will be bringing those ideas to this wider audience. And we're going to talk sustainability, where you'll probably hear some ideas related to water scarcity and climate migration, which are in our opinion, two very underappreciated big global concerns that we need to get our heads around for the next few years. On the science side, you'll be hearing all about automation and robotics in its various forms, from the manufacturing to the service side through to medical automation. In society, you'll be trying to get inside the head of consumers living 20 plus years in the future in different parts of the world and what their preferences and experiences and everyday lives look like. And then finally, for systems, you'll hear from the captains and they'll share some thoughts on the digitization of money, which obviously a very topical concern right now. So they'll be talking about blockchain, cryptocurrencies, etc. And then the final idea that they'll share within that category is how emerging markets are changing in a really fundamental way, and how we need to properly understand that. So a real diversity of ideas from the research captains across all four S's. And I'm hoping that today's session will be a nice warm-up to provide some context for those discussions.
Absolutely, and all essential areas for exploration. Well, Dara, it's been a pleasure, and as always, it's fun to connect. You're in Singapore, I'm in the mountains in Idaho, but it is great to see your face and hear where we're headed with future themes.
Thanks a lot, Trevor. I've really enjoyed the conversation. And to everybody listening, please, I'd encourage you to listen in to the other sessions that will be coming over the course of the next month or so.